Synopsis: Evelyn Eve Morales, a 62-year-old former combat medic, returns to a small-town gun store to buy ammunition for the heirloom rifle her late husband left her. When a brash clerk and an embarrassed owner throw her out, accusing her of being a threat and a shoplifter, Eve's dignity is stripped in front of curious onlookers. The arrival of Alexander Reed, the polished, private CEO of a national firearms manufacturer, changes the moment into a test of conscience. He recognizes the scar and the steadiness in Eve's eyes and, out of an old, unspoken debt, calls insisting on her respect and restoring her honor. Their reunion pulls the town into a quiet reckoning about class, power, and memory. Over the course of one sunlit afternoon that stretches into long nights of confession, action, and small, stubborn kindnesses, Eve and Alexander confront the choices that shape them: war, ambition, shame, and invent a modest, human solution that restores dignity not by money or notoriety, but by testimony, shared labor, and a new space for the wounded to become teachers. They called the way someone says sir to a judge, and the word snagged like a clean breath in the middle of the room. For a second the fluorescent lights over Reed's sporting goods hummed softer, like a dropped note finding the space between heartbeats. The men who had laughed, 3 with grease under their fingernails, 1 with a name tag that read Tommy, stopped. Their mouths closed the way doors do in an empty house. The woman who had been lifted onto the sidewalk by shame straightened her shoulders as if she had been handed back a small compass. Evelyn Morales tasted copper and rain on her tongue and the smell of new leather. She measured the word on the inside of her palm in the same way she had measured wounds once, pressing fingers over a ribcage to find the hollow, counting what lived and what had been taken. It was not the same as miss or sweetheart or the other cheap courtesies that tried to make her smaller. It was a sound of permission. "You don't know me," she said to the man who had used it, half apology and half command, because she had learned long ago that the two often travel together. Alexander Reed, tall, hairline like a broken horizon, cufflinks catching the light, tilted his head and looked at her properly, not the way the clock had looked, quick and calculating, but the way his stomach remembered shadow on a dirt road in Kandahar and called it by its true name. "No," he said, "but I know what you did." The clerk's laugh tried to find the air again. "Boss, what's this?" "Some Tommy." The owner cut in. Gus had been in the store since before the town had a stoplight. "Mr. Reed is here to talk about a distribution contract," Tommy offered, in the tone of a man practiced in offering bargains to strangers who might be gullible. He had the look of someone who believed rules were a kind of map you followed unless the map cost you money. "Alexander," the man corrected. To everyone in the room he was Mr. Reed, because his name appeared on billboards and the press releases that smelled faintly of lemon and the promise of safe bullets. To Evelyn, he was a younger man she had seen once beneath a stretch of tarp 2 time zones and several names ago, a man who had been the size of a small animal and shaking with a fever she had wrapped in a DuPont tarp and prayed into. "You're Mr. Reed," Evelyn said, and her voice carried so that people in the back of the shop, old men who came to talk guns the way others came to church, leaned forward. "You're the one from Kandahar," he finished for her. He lowered his voice as if the years themselves were listening. "Med Tent 8. The room rearranged itself around the memory like furniture after a storm. A boy at the counter, mid-20s, hair like straw, snorted. "Ain't none of my business," he said, "but you don't really expect folks to believe some coddled suit saved by some old lady." Evelyn's hand tightened around the canvas bag, where she kept a single box of .30-06. The box was small and honest. Its paper corners had been folded twice. Her knuckles were an atlas of faded white lines. "I didn't save him," she said. "He saved me." Silence had weight. The word saved, used in a city of small inflammations and biggest silences, landed like a stone. Alexander's mouth softened. "We saved each other," he said. "We bled toward the same medicine chest. There are ways to be thrown out that are obvious, hands on the small of the back, a shove that knows the shape of your spine, and then there are ways that are quieter, surgical in their humiliation." Evelyn had known the quiet kind her whole life. This was different. The clerk's accusation that she was a problem, the owner's embarrassed apology as if politeness could be a bandage, the way a line of regulars took side-eye into their mouths and swallowed. Evelyn had come into Reed's because the heirloom rifle sat in the corner of her trailer wrapped in an old blanket, the varnish gone to sleep and the metal a gentle rust. It had been her husband's and before that his father's. It was a map of breaths and winter nights, of late summer hunts, and the couple of times the gun had been held like a promise for a photograph where their faces were younger and the world had, for a moment, made room for them both. She needed bullets to prepare it for the market. If she could sell it, she could fix the leaking roof, pay the woman who cleaned houses on Tuesdays to come on a different day. She could maybe take the bus to town for the appointment the VA had scheduled. Small acts of dignity had a cost. Tommy mistook her hesitation for duplicity. Men like him see age and think currency of usefulness has been spent. They had let their judgments be loud. He had kept an eye on Evelyn the way certain dogs watch the fence line, making lists. He'd seen the way she carried the rifle like a relic and thought she wanted something else: credit, sympathy, trouble. The argument started over a box misplaced and swelled to the edges of ritual, where people perform their superiority like they perform prayer. It might have ended there with words and the flush of embarrassed men and Evelyn walking away with her sad box and the memory of youth unraveling one more notch. It did not end there, because Alexander had walked in with a cloth bag of his own and because the past is tenacious in the same way that shame is, and he carried a debt older than the hotel rooms and office towers that had taught him how to be rich and practical. He had been taught by a woman who bled into the sand and asked him to listen. He had kept that debt as some men keep prayer cards. "Evelyn Morales," he said, and his voice held the way a bell still holds the shape of a hand long after it has been gone. She blinked. "You know my name. You gave it." He stepped closer, the distance of many missed meetings and simple courtesies. He took off his tie, because in some places knots had meaning. When the building burned. When the building burned, years ago, the med tent on the base had been a place of work and make-do and cigarette smoke and a younger man who went by Reed, who drank coffee the way others drank air, to keep moving. The explosion had turned their sleeping quarters into an argument of flame. Evelyn had been on the other side of a tent wall with a roll of gauze and a kind of impatience that makes the heart a faster instrument. She'd crawled to her throat and found a pulse, and in the time between one breath and another she'd given a name, and the younger man had remembered it later in a hospital, when the fever had gone and his teeth unclenched from the dream. "Why now?" she asked. The question was old as loneliness. People arrive in a dozen forms with pity or money. Both can feel like a lesson. "Because things happen in the spaces between invoices and headlines," he said. "And because people," he paused, measuring the crowd. "People here think they know you because they can see the bone structure of you. They are wrong." He said it carefully, which made it sharper. The room shifted as if to make room for truth. Gus, who had always kept extra bags of popcorn near the register, as if they were sacrament, tugged at his cap. His mind liked to catalog debts in the way his ledger liked to count inventory. "Reed," he began, as if to hush the old man in him who disliked being lectured. "This isn't a lecture," Alexander said. "This is an apology for letting a man in my city be small. This is—" He looked at Evelyn and she could see the honest confusion of a man who had been given things and did not always know what to do with them. "This is recognition." Recognition was a small instrument like a folded letter. For Evelyn it arrived like a breeze pulling a curtain aside. She had learned to live with apologies the way other people learn to live with bills, quietly and with careful calculation. When a stranger calls your name like a bell, you expect a trick or a camera crew, or the scent of a deal that will leave your hands thinner. She stood, because she wanted to be obverse in an ordinary way. She wanted, today, not to be sharp. "Tell them," Alexander said. And when he did not finish the sentence, the room did what rooms do when someone leaves a sentence open. It supplied the rest. "Tell them what?" Gus asked, voice warming with the idea of story. Gus liked stories that began with "back in my day" and ended with a sale. "Tell them how you and I were both awake when the tent burned," Alexander said. "Tell them that the woman they would have sent to the street had a license to patch a throat that keeps men off the ground. Tell them how she steadied my hand when I wanted to throw it away." The story, once offered, took root. People like stories where their smallness is forgiven. They like redemption in pockets. The regulars leaned in, chewing their tobacco and their certainty. Tommy's face reddened. He could not forgive that he had been proven wrong. He practiced contrition the same way men practice flexing, awkward and unsure. Alexander repeated, and this time his voice did not tremble. He had something in his chest that wanted to be more useful than medals and a bigger office. Will you come inside? Evelyn's laugh came out as something brittle, and then as a surprise bird. Inside? I was just about to leave, Mr. Reed. I should. Alexander, he said. Please. She glanced at the rifle again, the way someone looks at a familiar picture. The box of ammo lay like a small island in her bag. Gus shuffled his feet, embarrassed at being the setting of a life's reconciliation. Evelyn went inside. She sat on a vinyl stool that had seen many people through hard hands, the way skin tells the story of weather and labor, and lit a cigarette though she had not smoked in years. It was a thing to do. Habit is a landscape. Outside, sunlight pooled in the parking lot and made the old pickup look like a reredos of better times. Alexander sat across from her. He wore the smell of suit and far flights, which was to say promise and distance. When he spoke again, his voice had folded into the private cadence people use when they are trying not to hurt someone they have already hurt by being absent. You were my medic, he said. You are the reason I can chew a steak without tasting copper. You held my hand until the shock blunted and I could speak like a human again. I never had a way to thank you. Evelyn turned the cigarette between her fingers as if it were a tiny compass. You don't get to say that to make me feel small, because some men like to watch me shrink. I don't want you to shrink. He stared at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had learned to sign checks and shake hands in a way that turned transactions into theater. I want to do something that starts where he stopped. There was a ledger in his look too, the one that counts debts that cannot be repaid by a check. I have resources, he said. I have a foundation. We build ranges and sponsor programs and teach safety. It's efficient. Evelyn watched him squirm with the weight of generosity. She had lived enough of her life to understand that the word foundation can be a bridge or wall depending on how it was thrown. I don't want a range, she said. I want a roof that doesn't drip and a bus that actually gets there when it says it will. I want my granddaughter to stop asking why money always has more faith in manholes than in people. Alexander blinked, and then he nodded. What is it you want, really? It was an honest question, a dangerous one. She had thought she wanted a new roof for months. She thought she wanted to be left alone. But the question opened a sluice. I want to teach, she said, surprising herself. Not some polished course. Not testimonials and photo ops. I want a space where people like me, old vets, kids who hold weapons because the world asks them to, women who are told they don't belong, can learn how to be steady. There's nothing for them here. You talk about safety like it's a slogan. I lived with it like a prayer. The old men in the shop outside were arranging themselves into a chorus. Safety is important, of course, but don't turn our pastime into therapy. The balance of parties in a small town is a complicated math. Alexander smiled then. It was a small, crooked thing that belonged to no one else. We could make a program, he said. A community program. Not just grand openings and plaques, real instructors, real hours. We could call it something uselessly noble, like the Steadfast Project. Evelyn snorted. People want their names on it. We'll put your name on it, Alexander said before he could count the cost. He had not intended that. When the words were out, he realized they were heavier than the others. They had consequences. We'll call it the Morales Room. We'll train instructors who are vets themselves. We'll teach safe handling, but we'll also teach how to look at the person across the lane and say their name. Names are the currency of memory. To have one spoken aloud in a room where it had been reduced to gossip was like watching a broken vase put back on the shelf. Gus, who ran the shop like a small-town mayor, cleared his throat. We'll host, he offered. It was small, but it was a beginning. We can host the first few classes here. Get the word out. I'll even give a discount to folks that come through. The regulars grunted. Meritocracy in the town had long been measured by how well you could handle a rifle and claim it was about survival. The idea that survival could also be about shared language, calling someone by name, felt like a softening. A year later, Alexander came to the opening of a new community center down by the river. The mayor gave a speech that mentioned funding and partnership and a future where the town would be strong and self-reliant. He wore a tie and a grin that tasted of press releases. After the speeches, he found Evelyn standing alone by the water, her profile lined against the dusk. He offered his arm, and she took it like someone taking the edge of a plank. "You look at the river much?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes I watch the light go in." They stood together in the dim. In the past, when planes fell and buildings burned, they had learned the hard architecture of survival. They had the kind of silence between them that is not an absence, but a shared language of what had been hurt and healed. Alexander said, "I was thinking today about the first time I saw you. I think I wanted to make small amends." "You did," she said. "No," he corrected gently. "Not with the program. Not with the building. With the way I said your name. I don't think I told you then how much that word mattered." Their hands met. Not the clasp of business partners, but the contact of two people who had learned the geometry of human debt. Evelyn looked toward the town. Lights, the long shadow of the congregation hall, the train like a silver line, and then back at Alexander. "We both did something," she said. "We built something you can't put on a balance sheet. People come with wounds. We change how they say the words." He laughed then, softly. "It's the only kind of business I want to be in now." They walked back toward the cluster of people, the murmurs of congratulations and the clink of cups. It was not a movie ending with fireworks and a ribbon to cut. It was the way real lives make endings, slowly, in shared work. Evelyn knew there would be days when the roof would leak again, and she would even have to teach a class by candlelight. She knew that men like Tommy would still think they had the right to judge. But she also knew, in the same way she had known how to find a vein in Dark Knight, that the Morales room lived now in the vocabulary and the muscles of a town. On the porch of her trailer that night, smoking a cigarette she had started again by choice, Evelyn looked at the stars and felt the shape of the world as a map of small reconciliations. Alexander had called home at a time when town law could have eaten her like a rumor. He had done more than offer an apology. He had given her the tool of recognition. There are debts that cannot be paid with money, but can be paid with attention, with a name, with the construction of space where people are given back their language. She put the box of .30-06 bullets on her table and ran her fingers over the cardboard. The rifle would wait. There would be a buyer with hands as honest as a weathered oar. But tonight she thought of the boy who had written, of mothers who cried in the doorway after class, of the man who used to sign his name on the bottom of press releases and now came bearing coffee. There was gratitude. Yes, but of a practical kind. The knowledge that she had been given back the right to teach, to name, and to refuse spectacle in favor of slow, patient care. Some people in the town would always keep their judgments folded like old coats in the closet. Others had learned to call out empty and mean it. That was something. It would not fix everything. It would, however, add a new syllable to the dictionary of the place. The word had landed like a coin and made a small dent in the road. It glinted there, a small thing, and the town could either kick it aside or pocket it and learn how to use it. Evelyn pocketed the coin. She rolled the cigarette between her fingers like a compass and put it down. The night was forgiving the way nights are. The stars did the mathematics of forgiveness with patient perfection. Tomorrow she would teach again. Tomorrow she would hand a gun to a man and say, "Clear," and wait for him to echo the word out into the space like a prayer. She thought of Alexander as a man who could stand at windows and sign checks and also learn how to boil coffee for volunteers. She thought of him as someone who had called home and not been afraid to mean it. She wondered, once, about the funny geometry of power. How a man with a company could call a woman who had been thrown out of a store by a clerk and, by doing so, unravel a little of the town's old ledger. In the city, men like Alexander have people who make their apologies smaller and their gifts larger. In small towns, apologies must be precise to matter. He had been precise. He had not taken the stage. He had sat in vinyl chairs and learned to pour coffee. He had called her by a name she had not expected to hear again. Evelyn closed the door on her small trailer and set the box of bullets by the photograph of her husband. The night hummed with crickets and a distant radio playing a song they had once danced to with the windows down. It was not a full healing. It was not a miraculous absolution. It was, instead, a rebalancing. The right word said at the right time, and the town learning, slowly, to measure each other by the names they were given, not the gossip they carried. Outside, somewhere in the dark, the train sighed and moved on. Inside, the Morales room would be open tomorrow, the chalkboard wiped clean, the chairs ready. The last thing Evelyn did before she lay down was press her fingers to the scar on her forearm, the one that had healed around a night of smoke and human failure. She whispered the name of the boy who had written her, and then the name of a younger man in a field hospital, and then the name Alexander had used that day. She let the word settle like a small coin in her belly and turned the light off.